Hello and welcome to the Edupedia world. In this tutorial, we'll be studying about constructors in Java. Well, it's a really important topic, and I think even the experienced programmers sometimes don't know all the concepts. So, I'm going to really spend a good amount of time in explaining all the concepts since this is really important. So, let's begin. Constructor is a special method that gets invoked automatically at the time of object creation. Fine. Constructor is normally used for initializing objects with the default values unless different values are supplied. Constructor has the same name as the class name. So by now you must have got 3 points that firstly it should have the same name as the class name, and it is used for initializing the object with default values. And thirdly, it is a special method that is used to automatically create the object, and it's called when the object creation happens. Constructors cannot have a return values. A class can have more than one constructor as long as they have different signature. So like we have different input argument syntax. And in Java, we have two types of constructor: default constructor, which is also called no argument constructor, and we have a parameterized constructor, which can take arguments. Now let's see how to create a constructor. So this is how we define a constructor. You can see there's a class counter, and then we have created a constructor with the name counter. So the text written in a red color is actually a constructor. So you can see the name of the constructor is exactly the same as of class, and yeah, it can have a access modifier which is public since class is public. So constructor can be public or private or default. Fine. So in this, we actually used to initialize our data members. So we are initializing counter index in this, and this is how a constructor is called. Well, this is a default constructor, or you can say no argument constructor. And even if you're not creating a constructor yourself, even if this code doesn't exist, the JVM automatically, do have a no argument default constructor itself. So even if you're not creating, it will still be called whenever you create the object. Even if you have explicitly not written, there is always an implicit no argument constructor. Constructor, as we have seen, constructor cannot have return value. So yeah, you can see that we don't have a return value with that constructor. And let's guess what's the output according to the class that we have created, counter. Well, in the first line, you can see counter1 equals to new counter. Now, as soon as you create an object, as soon as you write this line, the constructor get called. So constructor is used to create the object. So as soon as you do counter1 equals to new, as soon as the new keyword new counter, this line occurs, the constructor gets called and the object is created. Now once the object is created, you are doing counter1 dot increase. Now you are calling this method increase. Fine. After that, you are calling counter1 dot get counter index, and you are taking the index in A. After that, again you are calling counter1 dot increase. Fine. After that, again you are calling counter1 dot get counter index, and you are taking that in B. Then we are comparing A with B and checking if A is greater than B. Then we are calling counter1 dot increase. Otherwise, we are calling counter1 dot decrease. And in the end, we are printing counter1 dot get counter index. So let's see the program once again. So this is a program. In our first thing, the counter object is created with counter index equals to 0. So as soon as we do new counter, and the constructor get called and the counter index is initialized to 0. Fine. So this happens, and after that we call counter1 dot increase, and after calling increase we take the counter index in A. So you can say counter index dot increase is actually increasing counter index by 1, so the counter index will become 1, and the A will also be getting the value as 1 because get counter index is returning that. After that, you're again calling increase and then count index will become 2 and then again taking a value in B. So B will have the value as 2, A will have the value as 1. Fine. So you can see on the same object we are calling a increase. So the counter index value will get increase and B will have 2. So if A is greater than B, which is not the case, so it will go in a else case, it will decrease. So the counter index value will become 1, and when it will print, it will get the counter index equals to 1. So I hope you're also getting the same output as I'm stating over here. So now let's see what are Java parameterized constructors. Well, a constructor that have a parameter is known as a parameterized constructor. And why do we use parameterized constructor? Parameterized constructor is used to provide different values to the distinct objects. So let's see an example of parameterized constructor. You can see there is a class student 4 and then we have two data members ID and name. Just after writing the name we have created a parameterized constructor. So you can see student 4 with some parameters inside this is a parameterized constructor. Since it is having the same name as class name, it is not having any return type and it is having some parameters. So it is a parameterized constructor. In parameterized constructor, whatever values that we are passing in a parameter, we are actually, initializing the data members of student 4 with the same values. Fine, and then you can see there's a main method. Inside a main method, we have created two objects of student 4 S1 and S2, and we have, whenever we create an object, we are doing new student and we are passing parameters. Okay, so this thing is actually calling the parameterized constructor. Now in order to write this line and be able to compile this line, your class must have this parameterized constructor, because otherwise whenever it tries to do new student and it passes the parameters, it will search for a constructor with the matching parameters. If it doesn't find one, it will give you a compile time error thereon. So it must have a parameterized constructor as we are having over here, and yeah, it will call the student 4 and will create the two objects of student 4 with these values. Fine. So this is a use of parameterized constructor. Moving forward to constructor overloading. Constructor overloading is a technique in Java in which a class can have number of constructors that differ in parameter list. The compiler differentiates these constructors by taking into account the number of parameters. Okay, coming now to constructor overloading. Constructor overloading is a technique in Java in which a class can have number of constructors that differ in parameter list. The compiler differentiates these constructors by taking into account number of parameters in the list and their type. So let's see an example of constructor overloading. You can see in this example we have a class student 5. Again we have three data members in this one, ID, name and age. Then we have created a constructor of student 5 with int I and string n as a parameter, and in this we are initiating or initializing ID and name of this class with the values that we are getting in the parameter. Fine. After that you can see again we have created one more constructor. Now this constructor is having three parameters, I, N and A. Fine. In these value we are initializing ID, name and age. So we have total number of two constructor. One is to just initialize ID and name and other is to initialize the object with ID, name and age. Fine. Now you can see in the main method we are creating two objects, student 5 s1 equals to new student 5, and we are passing two parameters. So what do you think, which constructor will be called? Well, the first one, which is having two parameters, will be called in this case. Fine. And when we are creating our object student s2 equals to new student 5 and we are passing three parameters, that is 222, Aryan and 25. In this case, the second constructor will be called, which is having three parameters. So I hope you got the concept of constructor overloading. So it's a technique in which we can have multiple constructor, and how does compiler know? By comparing the parameter list and their type. So it will compare, like, first one is a integer 111. So it will check that to constructor have int I, then it will go to see the value current. So current is a string, and again to constructor have string, but then it is not having any other parameter. So with the two parameter list, we have just one constructor, and which is matching the data types also. So that's why it's gonna call the first constructor over here. Fine. So moving forward to the concept of multiple constructor. Sometimes we want to initialize in number of different ways depending upon circumstances, and this can be supported by having multiple constructor having different input argument, as we have seen in a previous example. So it is possible that sometimes we want to create an object without giving a age. I want to create a student, but I don't know the age. Then in that case, how will I do that? So I have a constructor with two arguments. I can still create an object of student by just passing name and ID, and I do have another one for passing all three. So I hope so you got the concept that why we need multiple constructor and how to create multiple constructors. Fine, so let's move forward. Okay, so this is again an example of multiple constructors. Here you can see we are having a public class circle, and then we are having three instance variables, public double x, y, and r. Fine. Then we are having a constructor public circle, and we have three parameters in this. All three are of a type double, and we are passing center x, center y, and radius in that. And in that constructor, we are initializing x, y, and r with the values that we are getting in the parameters. So basically, we are initializing the data members with the values we are getting in a parameter. Fine. After that, we have again one more constructor which is just taking one input, that is just taking a radius. So when it's taking a radius, what we are doing is we are initializing x and y to a center, that is 0, 0, and we are initializing r with the radius that we are passing. Fine, then we are also having a default or a no argument constructor in this, and in that we are initializing x and y to 0 and radius to 1. Fine. So now you can see you are having three constructor, and thereby you are having option to create object by three types, either by passing nothing, or by passing radius, or by passing the points and radius. Fine. And we have two methods, circumference and area. Fine. So now let's move forward to initializing a constructor. So in a previous example, how we can create the object. So as I have told you, we can create the object three types. Either we can create an object, by passing the points and the radius, as we are creating circle A. Then we are creating circle B by only passing the radius, and then we are creating circle C by passing nothing. Okay, so there are three ways of creating this object. So you can see circle 1 is actually having center and radius. Circle B is having a radius. Therefore, the center, according to the second constructor, are initialized to 0 and 0. And the third one, in which we didn't pass anything, the center is initialized to 0 and 0 and radius to 1, because that's what we are doing in the third constructor. Fine. So I hope so the concept of multiple constructor is fine. So let's move forward. First, we will see what is Java copy constructor. Well, if you have studied C++, then you must be knowing that C++ have a concept of copy constructor, but Java do not have a concept of copy constructor. But then there are many ways to copy the values of one object to another in Java, because that's a concept of copy constructor. Copy constructor is used to copy the value of one object to another. So how can you do same thing in Java? So they are either by a constructor, or by assigning the values of one object into another, or by clone method of object class. Well, the third one, the clone method, we will not be discussing over here. So let's go through by the first, that is by constructor. So you can see there's an example on the right hand side which is saying we have a class student 6 and it is having ID and name. Then we have a constructor for student 6 and in that constructor we are taking two parameters I and n and we are initializing that ID and name using those parameters. Then we are also having another constructor student 6 that is taking the parameter as a object of a class student 6. So the parameter in this constructor is a object of student 6 itself. And when we get this object, we are actually initializing ID and name again, but by taking s.id and s.name. So we are taking accessing ID and name from this object and initializing this ID and name. So you can see what it is doing. It is actually copying the values from the object that we are passing s to the object that we are creating. Fine. So you can see in the main method we have created one object s1 with the values 111 and current. Fine. So a object s1 will be created according to the first constructor where we are passing the arguments. Then we are creating another object s2 and in this constructor we are passing a object s1. So the object that we have created previously s1, we are passing the same object while creating s2. So s1 will be passed on and the second constructor will be called which is taking the object of student 6 and then the value s.id which is 111 will be initialized to id and s.name which is current will be initialized to the name of s2. So if we are going to display s1 and s2 both of us will give the same values. So this is the way through constructor. Okay. And another is by assigning the values of one object to another and by clones. Other two we'll be seeing later on, but yeah, this is the way you can do it by constructor. Fine. So let's move forward. Okay. So we are also having an example to show you how to copy the values without a constructor. Well, this is quite simple. You can see in that I do have just one constructor student s7 and which is initializing the value. I do also have a default constructor which is doing nothing. Fine. So what we are doing is in our main method, we are creating an object s1 equals to new student and where we are, passing 111 and current. So the s1 will be created with these value by calling the parameterized constructor. Then we are creating a object s2 by calling the default constructor. Fine. And after that, without the constructor, we are actually assigning s1.id to s2.id and similarly we are assigning the name. So it is actually assigning the data in the main method itself without constructor. Fine. So now let's see the difference between constructors and methods in Java. Well, you can see that there is a similarity between constructor and method as both of them are getting called. But when and how there is a difference. So let's see. Constructor is used to initialize the state of object, but the Java method is used to expose the behavior of an object. So method actually do something, it performs some action. But the purpose of constructor is just to initialize the state, just to initialize the data member. Fine. Constructor must not have a return type, whereas method can have a return type or must. I won't say must, you can have a void, but then again void is a return type. So method must have a return type. But constructor must not have a return type, not even void. Fine. Constructor is invoked implicitly. So that means you cannot invoke your constructor yourself. It is invoked implicitly whenever you create an object. Method is invoked explicitly. So you have to call the method using an object. Okay. Java compiler provides a default constructor if you do not have any. So if you are not creating any constructor in a class, the compiler will provide a default constructor implicitly. Fine. Method is not provided by compiler in any case. The last one is the constructor name must be same as the class name. But in case of a method, method name may or may not be same as a class name. So I hope so the difference is clear. Well, we do have, another section in this which are some important points of constructors. So these are a little bit advanced topic. So I hope till now you must have got the basic concepts of constructor. So let's quickly do an example in our Eclipse IDE and see how to create a constructor. Okay guys, so we are here in our vending machine processor, and let's create a constructor of this class product. Okay, so as I have told you, like we can have a default constructor. So up till now you can see we haven't created any constructor, and again you can see in vending machine IMP, although we are creating an object. So even if we haven't created any default constructor, there's an implicit constructor that compiler creates and that is getting called up till now. But now we are going to override that constructor, and to override the default constructor, just constructor name should be same as a class name. It should have these bracket and the parenthesis. So our default constructor is done. We need not do anything in this. This will also be a constructor. It's perfectly fine. Then we can also have a parameterized constructor. So in order to call a parameterized constructor, it will also be the class name, but you need to pass some parameters. So I'm passing string product name, fine. And double price in int quantity. And well, I'm actually initializing this with this. So this is a parameterized constructor that we have created in the class. So now, we were calling a additional method add products to create a, to initialize those values. Now we don't need this method. Why so? Because we are having a parameterized constructor. So we can also initialize this values as soon as we call the, or as soon as we create the object. So as soon as I'm creating the object, I can simply use this. It's giving me error, so just let me see. It's saying change the visibility of product to public. So you can see it's giving me to change the visibility of product to public, and I'm doing that because it's in a different package, and to access it across the different package it should be public, it cannot be default. So I've changed the access modifier to public for my both the constructors so that it is available outside the package. And now I don't need to call like add products to actually add my products, fine, because my constructor is taking care of that. As soon as I've created the object, I can pass values, and those values will be assigned through this, fine. So yeah, let me comment out add products because I don't need this. And now you can even try like running your program, and you can see it is still giving us the same output. You can see okay, let me just change this to on object creation. So as soon as we created the object, now we are not calling add products, we have just created an object, and you can see even if on object creation we do get the values initialized. Fine. So this was about the constructors. So this was a basic concept where we have a lot to learn more about constructor, and we'll be covering that in the next video. Okay guys, so thank you very much. Let's meet in the next video.